You are listening to Productivity Straight Talk with your host, Amber De La Garza. Amber is a sought-after productivity coach, trainer, speaker, and writer who gives entrepreneurs the straight talk on personal productivity. No BS, fluff, or overused jargon. Just actionable strategies to get results and succeed in business. And here is your host, Amber De La Garza, the Productivity Specialist.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to Productivity Straight Talk. Today is episode 279, Making Documenting Processes Non-Intimidating with Adrienne Bellehumeur. If you're a business owner who wants to learn effective business strategies, improve time management, and elevate productivity to maximize profits, reduce stress, and make time what matters most, then you're in the right place, and I'm so glad you've joined me. In today's episode, you get to meet our guest, Adrienne Bellehumeur. Adrienne is the director and co-owner of Risk Oversight, a leading Canadian firm specializing in governance and risk and compliance, internal audits, SOX, and CSOX programs. She is also the founder of Bellehumeur Co., where she consults, speaks, trains, and writes on documentation and workflow best practices. In her 15 years as a business owner and consultant, she has developed a practice she calls dynamic documentation that helps teams, projects, and organizations solve their problem and achieve their goals. Driven to help companies and individuals leverage their knowledge, manage their risk, and enhance their productivity, Adrienne believes everyone can work better and smarter through more effective documentation practices. She is the author of The 24-Hour Rule and Other Secrets for Smart Organizations, which is her second book on documentation best practices. In today's conversation with Adrienne, you will discover the problem with the way documentation is traditionally taught, how much documentation should small business owners strive to achieve, how and where to get started with documentation, what dynamic documentation is and how to utilize it, common challenges small business owners have when creating documentation and processes, how to overcome those challenges, how to use the grid system to make your documentation more appealing, and so much more. If you would like coaching and accountability to help manage your time, create more efficiency, make new hires, reduce the stress and overwhelm of running a business, or a partner who can help make strategic decisions that will help you level up your business, then I would love to talk to you. I invite you to schedule a discovery call so that we can discuss partnering together to help you get unstuck, reduce stress, and determine a clear path to increase profits. To learn more and schedule a discovery call, head on over to amberdelagarza.com/coaching to schedule. And now let's meet our guest and get to the straight talk. Welcome to Productivity Straight Talk. How are you doing today?
Great. How are you?
So good. I am looking forward to our conversation. But before we dive in, I have to ask, why do I get to talk to you about documentation? Like, what is that journey that you grow up and you become someone that gets to write a book and know all the things about processes and documentation?
Well, I really sound like a nerd from that intro, Amber. Of course, it's a bit embarrassing, but I've actually had a long-term kind of nerdy fascination with notes and documentation. It goes back to even high school, where I would sit in class and wonder what people are doing, writing at their desks, and I felt notes were always a superpower to get better at school. Documentation has actually fascinated me in the workforce. I started as a CPA, chartered accountant, and I remember thinking how dull the training was in our corporate world. And as a small business owner myself and a consultant for many businesses, I see it as this missing ingredient or missing sauce to understand it. And part of that is just the lack of engaging training out there. So I've seen it as a long-term mission to change that conversation.
That's awesome. So you started doing consulting with companies around processes. Is that how you got started in this area?
So by background, I'm a chartered accountant. I entered the corporate world thinking I was going to climb the ladder, but I actually got off that ladder really young. I was 25. I'm a heck of a lot older than that now. I was 25 when I actually went into solo consulting, contracting. Really decided that having a job wasn't for me. So actually, I haven't had a job in 20 years now. I over the years, obviously start pretty humbly at that age. But I've built a few businesses now in the consulting space. I own a compliance business and I do documentation training as well.
All right. So what are some of the common challenges small business owners have when they think, I need to get documentation and processes? What do you commonly see for them as challenges?
Well, number one, time and resources. Small. That's such a probably cop-out answer that you get on your show, Amber. Small business owners are stretched really thin. I can say the same about myself. It's not like the corporate world that has ample resources, regulatory backings by the market, backings by investors to have big consulting names in and teams of documenters. So obviously this is a bit of a cop-out answer, but resources are number one. So the way that we've traditionally taught documentation is very big and corporate. And there's actually hasn't been great guidance for small business owners. So number one is just that right-sized documentation, lightweight, that's really nimble and drives you forward kind of training for our small business community. That's part of the mission with my work. I do work with big companies as well, but my principles are very malleable to what size of business you're working on.
I love that you said right fit, because so often I think that a business owner could have in their head, it needs to look a certain way and be a certain way, probably from their background in corporate prior to owning a business. That can be incredibly intimidating. And so just the magnitude of work when we are limited on resources of time and the labor to put into documenting the processes. So what would right size be for a small business owner? How do they know when too much is too much and just right is just right for documenting?
Well, small business owners are extremely practical. They're great to work with. I mean, that practical mindset you don't see as much in the corporate world. So that my benchmark for the right size documentation is the practice I teach is called dynamic documentation. And while documentation has traditionally been thought of as static, like piles of binders or data you have in a database over there, files that no one's touching. When it's done properly, it's dynamic. It moves you forward. So my very simple benchmark is if your documents are helping to drive you forward, they're working. So a process that is technically accurate, but is 50 pages and no one follows it is not a dynamic document. A document that's really simple could have 5 bullets, but your people still follow it. That's dynamic. It moves you to forward state. If you create a short email or you have a repository of information to sell more business and it's making you move forward as a business owner, it's dynamic and it's working for you. I know a very, very simple metric I use, but it's remarkably powerful for testing what will work for you. And once you get past that kind of the overkill zone, it'll actually hinder your ability to drive work, momentum, sales, scaling your people forward because it won't get followed or things will get lost or muddled.
Yeah, it sounds like you're a proponent of keeping it simple and useful for the end user when documenting it.
I am a huge believer of lean principles in general. It's not about having everything perfect or glistening clean. It's about that constant forward momentum that you get.
Yeah. When you said dynamic, what came up for me too, and maybe this is just how I perceive that word, but that it's always being updated. Like it's not
Absolutely.
stale. Okay. I just wanted to check with you if I heard that correctly, is that I often use the language of like a living document. It's always in process. It's never 100% done, and it's open to being changed as our businesses, most certainly businesses change quickly in how we do things.
Absolutely. Yeah. My brand of documentation, dynamic documentation it's very intentional. It's all about moving you forward, iterating, making it living. A project plan is not your sales material to support. Your CRM is living. Your database of prospects is, I mean, these are all living processes and pieces of documents as well. Yeah.
Okay. What's your advice for a business owner to just get started? Where do they start in their business with processes when it feels as though that can be just a huge undertaking? Even if it's simple, it's a huge undertaking for all the different parts of a business. What's the best place for a business owner to start?
Well, usually when I work with clients, we start with a specific problem at hand. And documentation problems, they surface in many different ways. You might have a critical function in your business that's all kept in someone's head, and that person could be leaving. I mean, you might be recreating the wheel with your sales material, where your sales team isn't giving consistent sales material out. I mean, this is actually a very common scenario. I do work. These are all scenarios I've seen many times, by the way. You might not be able to find anything, and it's really delaying your team and your ability to get work done or deliver on projects. Depending, again, these all depend on different business owner situations. You might be gearing for sale of your business. Documentation can actually increase the value of of small businesses get sold that have better documentation, sell for a higher price. I mean, there's you could be preparing to go public. That's also a document. These are all, believe it or not, documentation problems. So often where I start with clients and where small business owners should reflect is where they're having problems and where can they use documentation to solve it, because documentation often underpins the solution to what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, actually, I think I just have this like burning question now. I don't know why we weren't going to talk about this in the first place, but how do you work with your clients on helping with documentation? We will, and we're going to talk about documentation and processes and how important they are. But I just love that there's a resource, because this is not every business owner's wheelhouse. And it's really not their highest value activity to contribute to the business, even though it is highly valuable to the business, right? So just share with us about how you come in and how you help with a business owner on creating documentation so that we know that resource is available.
Well, one way I get hired is for a specific problem, as I mentioned. The second area I get hired is more of like an assessment, because a lot of business owners, or that small, medium-sized business especially in the high growth stage, that's actually when they start to recognize, this is not the only scenario, but this is a pretty common scenario. I'm sure many of your listeners are going through this, is when they're getting to a state of leverage where they want to scale, they want to get more people up to speed, they're partnering. That's actually puts huge pressure on better process and documentation. So I'm often brought in to either give a bit of an assessment, I call it like a documentation audit, to find out where we can kind of attack some low-hanging fruit and make it better. And that's where I have actually quite a few techniques in my book, and they can be sized for any organization, to how to assess what level you're at, your standards of documentation, your skills needed to be successful, and different disciplines to have these skills throughout the whole process. So I do come in that scenario. And again, the second one, yeah, very common is people have identified something gone wrong, like they're about to lose a bunch of information in someone's head. The sales scenario I've seen actually many times where sales teams are not cohesive. They're sending out materials that are not properly vetted, and it's hurting their ability to clinch sales. I actually also work with companies going public. So again, as you can see, it's almost a pattern that there is a problem that's documentation related. And my book is actually geared on 6 steps that I use to solve these problems. And these 6 steps are capture, which is, getting information out of your people's heads or out of systems. Structure is doing something and kind of pulling that together. Presenting is how you write or visual design. Communicate is obviously two-way communication with your stakeholders. Store and leverage is about storing, having the right systems to put things in. And my last step is called lean and innovate. And that's about doing something and being actually having influence and leadership and driving change because of this process. It's almost like the bonus step or the rewards you get from better documentation.
Okay, well, actually, let's go through those a little bit more detail. So when you're working with a company to capture, are you like in real life? Is this virtual? And how are you capturing, or what are your recommendations?
So I'm a huge believer in note taking. This is one practice of capture, but it's for my business owner listeners here, this is such an important skill. I mean, and a lot of business owners are very busy and very entrepreneurial, and taking notes is probably not the sexiest topic to talk about. But notes are more than just going to a meeting and listening to what someone said and writing it down. It's about your filter on information that comes throughout your day. So note taking in my own business is very important, but note taking in general as a capturing step is super important to everyone. If you bump into someone at an event and you want to, they will later become a prospect that you send a proposal to, you need to capture that information somewhere. It could be in your CRM. It could be, you could have a brilliant idea in the shower. Where did you put that idea? I mean, notes, it could be a brilliant article you read. Oh my goodness, this is really helpful for my business. I think a note is such an interesting, important concept to have a system for getting better. And obviously we all filter information based on what is relevant to our own life and own business and what matters to us. And that filtering is like makes us human. But how do we accelerate it? And especially business owners that are asked to, they produce content, they're connecting with people, they're managing all this stuff coming in. How do we manage those notes? So capture is largely driven from an understanding of notes. And I do go to clients, by the way, and I do a lot of interviewing to capture. I believe, just like you're doing now, I mean, interviewing is a total power skill. And it used to be just Oprah that did it. I mean, now we have a proliferation of amazing podcasts now. And I think it's really actually accelerating this amazing skill of connecting one-on-one with people. And it's still actually the best way of getting the best documentation is one-on-one connection with different people.
So then you're speaking to the person that's doing the activity or task or project in the business, and you're extrapolating with note-taking how it is they do it. So you're getting it out of their brain.
Yes. Yes. You recapped much quicker than I said it. That's exactly correct. And interviewing and capture, it's a lot of the capture I do is capturing from people's brains. Be in a meeting or interviewing. It's a remarkably powerful skill and discipline to solve business problems and to drive actually better documentation and all these documentation problems that I can imagine
that step can feel messy to the person being interviewed. They're like, how could this make sense to them? Like, I'm just, this is just the way I do it. And they're just spewing it out, which you're capturing. And I assume gets us to step number 2, which is the structure. You're going to make sense of everything that they just said, messy or not, right?
Yes. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. In some ways, it's almost embarrassing how simple it is talking to someone, getting their brain on paper and then doing something about it. That's almost pretty much what I do professionally and train other people to do. But it's a remarkable power skill. I mean, we have such a experienced, expensive knowledge workforce, but we need techniques to get that information out of their head and make it usable. And I believe everyone can get better at just the basics of capture, structure, and doing things with information in their heads and the heads of the people around them.
Okay. So what does structure look like? So after you've captured with notes, what would structure look like for a business owner?
So structure is an interesting step. It's the hardest for me to teach people because structure is about making sense of information. It could be as basic as I've taken a bunch of notes. Now I'm going to pull it and make a process, or I'm going to throw it into the proposal I'm working on, it can be also starting something from scratch. Another example of structure is sometimes I walk in and there's a bunch of documents all over the map, and it just doesn't, it's not cohesive. So you learn how to pull information into the right SharePoint site, or
like organization.
Or basically you're organizing. You're basically organizing. It's like organizing your sock drawer, but not doing that for information and having a way of doing it. But structure is really where what separates knowledge workers, in my opinion. It's not everyone can perfectly structure information. You do have to practice. Of course, things like templates and best practices can help you, but you really do need to structuring is a technique you learn through practice and through confidence to know how to do things with the information in front of you.
Yeah. So the structure helps with the logical accessing of that information later. And I would assume the structure is helping with consistency. One of the things that I experienced was that when I was tasking different people on my team to capture and document processes, very early on, we realized we had to send them a template and give them exact examples of how we want it written, because the way someone perceives and writes it is way different than the next person. And so there wouldn't be cohesiveness around all of the processes in the business. So the structure is those guidelines, correct?
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. So templates is part of structure. Absolutely. Now, as a CPA and someone who does a lot of work in the corporate world, templates, I have a bit of a love-hate with templates because we can get a little overzealous with our template. I call it template hell, especially when you work with a lot of big consultants and whatnot. I mean, no, templates for my small businesses are usually much more reasonable, by the way, but a template is almost your lowest bar to starting the structure process, but it is part of that. It's about getting consistency. It's about pulling it into a usable format and basically doing something with information. So
yeah. Are you a proponent of individual processes, like in documents, or one huge document that has all the processes, say for a department or a business?
It depends, actually. So some of my smaller clients, for example, this is in general, you separate, like the idea of modular documentation is pretty widely, which is it basically means like componentized documents or processes is pretty widely considered a best practice. But some of my smaller clients, actually, a product I do quite frequently is like accounting manuals or internal control manuals. It actually works better. I don't want to manage 30 different documents. Sometimes manuals do work if they're well written. I absolutely do use those for smaller businesses. I go in where the accounting finance team has nothing, and we can walk out with a pretty good manual of how things work afterwards. So I would say it absolutely depends. Yes.
And I can see that working, right? Because for accounting, there is a process of money in and then everything has to happen and then money out. There's like this linear process. Whereas in some other departments, say, if you're looking at marketing, it's like this one-off thing and this one-off thing, and they're not necessarily connected. So having them in one manual might not make sense. But when you have a need, you want to be able to search it, find it, get in and out from those, you call it modular. I've not heard that term. I love that term. That's how my business is set up, is modular.
Yeah.
I want people to be able to search, or it's attached to recurring tasks or projects. To me, it felt path of least resistance, that they didn't need to scroll a document or be intimidated that they open a 40-page plus document. They can just get in and out with the information they need.
Absolutely. So what you're practicing modular, it is generally considered best practice. And that is in general what I use. But I will say that I do have scenarios where circulating 30 documents is not going to work. So we do a manual, and it does work. So I absolutely use, I call it modular versus chunky documents. And chunky is where you actually get more cohesive. I have had many circumstances with clients where they have, they're not getting the collaboration or buy-in because they have too many documents. So there is funny. You do see structure can work both ways. Structure can be modular, where you go lots of little bits, or bring it together for certain environments. So as I said, it is a hard skill to teach, because it depends on the user very much.
I actually like that you're saying it's not a one size fits all. You really need to consider, how will your team adapt it? What is your specific processes and needs? And then go with what you think. And then if it doesn't work, I assume you could take a chunky and make it module if it didn't work.
You can chunky or go modular. Yes, they
So it doesn't have to be perfect.
Talk about this. I know what I have. Yeah, I absolutely talk about those in the book. You seem like you've read the book, because you're describing exactly there. Yes, you're correct.
Well, we do talk a lot about processes here at Productivity Straight Talk, because they're just so important to the efficiency. And I do want to get to your other steps, but thank you to that point. I feel like processes are so important because it just highlights inefficiencies. It gives you the ability to create efficiency when you can actually see it in black and white and slow it down. And so with processes, it's kind of an audit of not just documenting it, in my opinion, but really looking at it saying, is this the most efficient way? Wow, when I actually write it down, it seems like we're doing these steps twice, or there's duplication, or there's steps in here that aren't needed. And so for me, it's also a way to just create a more streamlined business.
Absolutely. Yeah. Documentation is actually not about the documentation. It's about the dynamic. Like, it's about what you do with it. I don't really care about the documents. It's just, to me, it's an underpinning practice that helps you in so many areas, like productivity, like information management, like processes for bigger companies, smaller companies. So it's kind of a conduit to bigger and bolder things, in my opinion.
Yeah. You had said something earlier about if you have documentation, it makes your business more valuable when you sell it.
Yeah.
What we didn't circle back on is, but why? And it's because you've reduced the risk of the buyer, that the knowledge is going with the previous owner, right? Like, you're capturing that knowledge base, which in any business, it could be argued, but especially small business, that's where the value is the knowledge. And so once you sell it, if that knowledge leaves the company, what if that was the secret sauce that made it successful? And with documentation, that's been captured.
Absolutely. So I have a friend that does this work, and he's seen many people get a bit higher price or lower price for their business, which translates to a lot of money, based on the quality, and people are even pulling emails and processes and CRM material, like all that stuff that are just good practice every day. He certainly sees very different sale prices depending on that documentation.
I could totally say that. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's go to your next step that you've highlighted in the book. And of course, in the book, you go into much more depth. It's a full book. We're just hitting the little highlights here to give you pieces of it. What does presentation mean? Or was it present? I took short notes.
Yes. So presenting is about making your documentation or your documentation systems pop. You can be technically correct all you want, but if people don't engage with it, it doesn't really matter. So I have techniques about how to write better. And they're really, I've spent a lot of time researching technical writers, copywriters, journalists. They all have great things to say. The dynamic writing style is about kind of smushing all these great practices that I've pulled from others into a really neat way of writing. Actually, I think everyone should be trained in copywriting. I think it's, even though I'm an accountant, and most accountants have this very dry language, we can learn from our marketers. We can learn from what journalists do. We can learn from bloggers. So that's my take is let's learn from all these different styles of writing and adopt the best for yourself. So I do pull a lot of great tips on that in the book. And dynamic design is about giving your documents pop. It could be this could be a system. Obviously, anything that's dry as toast. I mean, today's world, we are competing with so much distraction. We can't just make things look dry as toast. So there's so many easy ways to make things look better. There's almost no excuse in the corporate world for just going through what we did 30 years ago that bored everyone to tears. So those are what those tips are. So there's kind of some low-hanging fruit to giving your documents pop and driving more engagement out of them.
Can you give us a couple examples? Like, are you talking about using imagery? Is it how we format it? Just a couple tangible examples, because I don't think anyone's really given any thought to how to actually present your processes in a more appealing way.
So, I mean, a very basic principle of now, by the way, I do hire people to help me with the look. I get very impatient with I do have marketers and designers, but one very simple principle is using a grid system when in your document. If your documents are not actually in a grid, it's kind of not as visually appealing. So and certainly you can again, I like to steal or borrow tips from lots of different professionals. And this is one I got from my designers, and it's actually remarkably effective. There's so much great art out there on the internet. I mean, I'm a huge believer in stock photos. I'm always searching for the best stock photos. I mean, this is a really simple idea. Obviously, use stock photos where you can, obviously, to be tasteful, but you can use emojis. I've seen emojis in presentations that are hilarious. Those are some obviously very low-hanging fruit, but it's a little bit about using grids, even white space appropriately, and splashing on some pop with these very easy tips as well. So
so you're talking about adding like maybe a little bit of the company's personality into it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, Vizio and Microsoft products, they have so many easy visuals. I'm not saying you need to be overly sophisticated and all, but you do need to consider the visual impact with your users. And I certainly believe in combining skills with people, like I call it the dynamic documentation skills stack. And I don't do all my design myself, but it's designers will find the pop, but with simple imagery, simple diagrams that resonate. It's not about being technically accurate. It's actually about being readable and resonance with your users. That is how I judge visual appeal with documents or documentation systems.
Yeah. And when you're referencing copywriters, for those that don't know, like a copywriter you would hire to do your website or sales page or brochure, and it really brings a voice to the words, so it's not so dry. And when you're saying about the copywriting and journalism, it's actually reminding me. So I bought this piece of furniture, and I had to put it together this weekend. And so I have all these instructions and all these pieces to the furniture. And, this is not anything anyone looks forward to, is like all the steps to putting the furniture together. However, this instruction manual is it was 6 steps. It wasn't that hard, but every step was full of personality. And it got to the last step and it said, okay, for this last one, we agree. This is probably the most complicated, but will be certainly worth it. Grab your favorite bubble, bubbly champagne or sparkling water.
Oh my Goodness, that's hilarious.
Right. And on the box on the outside, it was like doing adulting good. And like, it was just like language that was like making me laugh. Like even my husband came home that day and I was like, babe, like you gotta like read this. This is hilarious. And you know what I found? Because as business owners, we're always observing our own behavior. I wanted to go to that website and find out more products I could buy from them just because I enjoyed putting the furniture together only because the language they chose was so engaging.
I'm going to try that in my next accounting manual. That is hilarious. That is really funny. I don't know how my clients will react if they see a documentation standard with that, but maybe I'll try it, Amber. It's hilarious. But now the point about copywriting is that marketers are trained to write with pop and tight language that resonates with the user. And this can be really lost, especially in our corporate world. And I think small business, there's so many actually great courses. You could Google copywriting basics and you'll see there's a slew of really cheap courses online. I think everyone should take it. Doesn't matter if you're an auditor, a lawyer, or small business owner. We need this tight, effective language to get through to our audience, no matter what we're writing.
Absolutely. All right. So take us to the next step. Is that communication? Communicating?
Communicate. So I mean, it's about making documentation a living, breathing document. I run a compliance business. I don't like to tell about my things that go wrong, but I've had scenarios where I've had people do incredible work, but no one knows about this work. It's just sitting in file and they're brilliant at what they do. So, it'll hurt us with our client relationship. I mean, documentation is about living and getting out there to people. And this kind of lends to lean thinking and design to always make it iterative and getting that feedback. We can always get into things like meetings and reporting or email are also part of that picture of communicate, but it's really about getting through to the user. And my practices are actually very much based on reporting, being really transparent about what's in your head, and using documentation techniques. I'll just get in a little. I'm not going to get. Obviously, this is a big topic. We could spend 3 hours talking about email alone, as you know, but one principle I have is really just using reporting, which not as a dirty word, but to just get more out of your head onto paper and out to stakeholders to make things usable. And that's one practice I use quite a bit in my book and my work. And reporting can be absolutely small business owners. Amber, there's a really cool thing from Jeff Bezos is actually a big fan of memoing. If you can believe it or not, he used to have team members when he was growing Amazon. He would have team members write these memos basically. And these memos would come from the warehouse all the way to the executive. And they would circulate these memos before meetings and read them in silence and then discuss the topic during meeting. And he used memos just to get information out of people's heads. I actually think this is a brilliant use of communicate. We're cutting through bias and getting things on paper.
Okay. All right. And would you say communicating is also like communicating that they exist? So for example,
yes,
it's like, okay.
Listen, I mean, I have seen this where I've seen brilliant stuff just go, no one knows about it. This is a huge topic. Communicating that exists. It almost is an underpinning step of all that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I can see like you do this big push, you get all this documentation and processes, and then someone leaves, and then you're like, we got to hire, and we hire. And heaven forbid you forget to actually say, hey, we actually have all this documented for your role. And it seems so obvious, but if it's not always used and it's not a living document and part of the culture that this is how we work is by referencing these processes, they can get lost. And it's really good information getting missed. It's a missed opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right. So take us to your next step. What is your next step?
So the next one is store and leverage, which is a little bit boring, but this is actually how we traditionally view documentation. When people say, "Oh, you're in documentation," I guess what system do you use? It's implied that we're just talking about where we put things. If you go to information management conferences, they're talking about tools, they're talking about repositories. So I actually believe it's one component. It's the most talked about of all the steps. And obviously very important, very topical nowadays because we have so much information. In general, with information management and my work with clients, it's really about just good policy and decision and staying on top of things. I've never seen documents or information just stay in great shape without some regular review. I don't think technology won't totally do that for you. You need some human intervention to always look at how your information is and how it's serving your business and how it and because information actually does shift over time depending on scenarios.
Do you recommend, so even if you were to come into a company and help with the initial documentation, do you recommend that there's like one person that's in the company that's role is to make sure that they stay updated and, cohesive, kind of like the librarian of the processes?
So that is such a good point. It's not uncommon that I walk into companies that no one owns documentation or information management, or else it's very confusing, or you get 5 different responses. It's actually a very common challenge in information management. I don't think we assign accountability well enough, and this applies to businesses at all levels. I don't think we compensate people actually appropriately for it. We kind of relegate it to a pretty low-level task, even though it could increase the sale size of our business. It's so you're completely correct. Actually, I certainly talk about this, and I see the scenario come up no matter what size the company.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important. Like, even when I think about just like organization in our homes or in our business, like a system of organization, that's great. And it was a project, but the key is what's the maintenance plan, right? Like if you don't have a maintenance plan, i.e. somebody responsible for taking the maintenance of this and the responsibility, then man, you could have initiated this whole project and in a year, 6 months, they're out of date and not really as a value or as much value to the company. So this piece right here about the maintenance, I believe is so important to the success of the value, having that asset in the business, such as processes documented.
And it's very hard for small business owners, by the way, because we are to my first point about being resource constrained. I am very good with my clients' documents. I have really good process. And then I'm not going to lie. It's hard to find the time. I mean, we have so many client deliverables. It's not something you make an immediate money with. And I am cognizant of it. I do it obviously because I get up and speak to people about documentation, and I still tell you, like, geez, it is hard. Your small business listeners, I completely get it that it's hard to find the time to get things in order for yourself because you're so busy serving clients or customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Time and resources is a constraint until you can really put a priority on it and connect the dots of like, oh, it will make my business more valuable. Oh, the onboarding will be less expensive to the next employee because I have these processes. You almost have to sit down and connect the dots of where the value is, because superficially alone, you're like, oh, documentation, totally not highest value, highest priority on the list, until you connect it to some really high priority, high value items, which is how I, encourage my clients to get motivated about processes. Is like, okay, well, what's the why? Like, how is this going to be an asset in the business? And is it a value to you to create the time for that asset? If you can kind of draw those lines, somehow that project gets, pushed up the list of priorities for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, leverage and scale. I mean, as companies want to leverage and scale, it's part of that bigger picture that, and it is difficult because you do have to invest to move forward. So, not going to deny how difficult it can be to find the time to do it as well.
Right. Absolutely. All right. And so let's close this out. What is the last step that you'd like to share with us from your book?
So I call it Lead and Innovate, and it's cut like the bonus step, and it's about making documentation make you more of a doer leader. I say I believe it's a subtle but powerful form of influence. Obviously documentation is about supporting change. Even we're talking about leverage and scaling and everything else. One simple tool, or it's another rule in the book, is called the 24-hour rule, but I have actually many rules in the book, and one is called the groundhog trap. And the groundhog trap is about a rule that means you need to use documentation to contain runaround discussions about either future projects or past decisions. So in my work, groundhog conversations, where you're repeating the same conversation over and over again in your business, is one of the biggest wastes of time and energy that I see in my clients. So I believes very strongly documentation is an antidote or a mechanism to trap these groundhogs, or at least safely release them back because we're just spinning on a decision we want to make. Oh, I think we should do this project. Oh, I don't think we should do this project. Or we're recapping something that happened in the past, and we have to keep explaining it to our customers or to our staff. And I'm a huge believer to identify these scenarios and use documentation to drive you forward. It's usually a documentation problem when you are constantly repeating yourself on the same topic. So it's a small but powerful act of leadership, in my opinion, because you're actually stopping this discussion and getting yourself to a forward state of movement and change.
Yeah, it's almost full circle to your steps, right? It's about capturing. Like I can think of being in corporate and so many meetings where you'd have a meeting and a decision was made and nobody took the notes, and now we're hashing it out again, and nobody was accountable to dispatching what that decision was and what the actionables are. And so just that sense of how we started this whole conversation of capturing with notes could prevent or at least shorten it, right? You might start the conversation, but at least you have something to go back to. You're like, no, we have this captured. The decision was made. I can see how beneficial that is. And when you don't have the capturing, how you could be looping the same conversation over and over again.
Yes, it's definitely, I mean, we have lots of groundhogs running around the corporate world. We actually have them in small business too. I mean, it's without writing things down, and notes are a great technique. Memos, writing things out of people's heads, logs, project plan. There's so many dimensions to stop groundhogs. But it really goes back to just good documentation, in my opinion. And it's very powerful for stopping these discussions. I actually stop a lot of groundhogs in my own work with clients.
Yeah, that's such a good point. As my example was corporate, but in small business, either way, there's just so many decisions that are made. You, the decision maker, can forget you made a decision a month ago about something if it's not captured and documented correctly. So very good point. All right, so can you just hit those steps real briefly, the top names of them, so we can summarize for our audience today?
Sure, yeah. They are capture, structure, present, communicate, store and leverage. Oh,
yep, you got it. And lead and innovate.
Lead and innovate there.
Yes, we ended with that one, right? Okay, so that was really, really helpful to go through those steps. And of course, those steps are much more detailed out in your book. So why don't you share with our listeners about your book, where they could get it? And it's as of this recording, it's just come out a couple of weeks ago. So we would definitely want to support you. And then also where they can find out about the work you do.
Sure, that's great. So the book, The 24-Hour Rule and Other Secrets for Smarter Organizations, it is the first mass market book on documentation best practices, but don't worry, it is actually a fun, light read. And I wrote it to not serve one particular profession, industry, or community. I actually wrote it as a pervasive best practice for today's workforce. And it is intended to be really lightweight. You could really apply it to a large company or a small company. So my book is available at any major retailer, Amazon, Penguin Random House, Barnes & Noble, everything. I mean, it's available anywhere. My website is bellehumorco.com, and I'd love to connect with your listeners on LinkedIn. I'm active there. My accounting website is riskoversight.ca. We serve clients largely in the Alberta and Canadian market. But yeah, I would thank you so much. I would love to connect with people if they have any questions on documentation best practices and certainly what that means for their business. And I love working with small business owners because they are such practical thinkers, just like myself. And I, as a small business owner myself, I also understand how difficult it is to invest in these things. I've made everything as simple and as value added as possible.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here and letting me have this conversation with you for our listeners about processes, the importance, and some practical steps on how to navigate taking on that project for themselves, or at least and letting them know that there are people out there like yourself to help get these processes documented, which is a value. I think that many business owners may not even know that there's someone out there that has this skill set that can help them with it. So if you are looking for that skill set and think that she will be of help to you, we will make sure we're linking out to her website and the book and the show notes. And thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you so much.
I have loved having you listen to this episode of Productivity Straight Talk. And I sure hope you found today's conversation with Adrienne to be insightful and inspire you to action to simplify your documentation process. I think the key here is just to start somewhere and start small. No change. Without taking action, nothing will change for you or your business. So if you have had SOPs and documentation on your to-do list, your project list for some time now, what is one small action you can take today to move forward to completing your SOPs, to documenting your processes? One small action. A lot of the conversation Adrienne and I had today was about simplifying this, making it approachable and not overwhelming. And I think that's incredibly important with something like SOPs and processes. I would love to speak with you if you were looking for coaching and accountability. If you want to take what you've learned here in episodes of Productivity Straight Talk and apply it and take action consistently. If you want customized strategies, customized support, then we should talk. If you want to improve your time management, create more efficiency in your business, make a new hire or lead your team, reduce the stress and overwhelm of running your business, and learn to make strategic decisions that will help level up your business, then we should talk. To schedule a discovery call and learn more about working with me in my private peak performance coaching program, head on over to amberdelagarza.com/coaching. And if you are new here at Productivity Straight Talk and you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss another episode. If you enjoyed this episode, do not keep it a secret. Please share it with another business owner that you think would find value in this episode. So that's my straight talk for today. Until next time, have a productive week.